Hello and welcome to Pale Moon Ranch. A couple of months ago I built this side table and it was mostly a design it as you go project. Since then I basically reverse engineered it into a Fusion 360 model. With this I was able to derive a set of plans or blueprints and a cut sheet. Both the model and the plans are linked below and you are free to use them if you wish. It would be a simple matter to create toolpaths in Fusion 360 to cut the parts for this on your CNC, if you have one. In this video, which will be fast and furious, I will run down the steps I took to create this table. First, let's make the top. It's 22 inches wide by 20 inches deep. Has a 1/4 inch roundover on the top and 4 pilot holes on the bottom for screw mounting it to the frame. I built mine using a combination of walnut and cherry, but of course you're free to choose whatever species appeals to you. My walnut was only about 8 inches wide, so it took 3 panels to make a top 20 inches deep. Make sure your grain on the top runs from side to side. The slotted screws will then allow the wood to move front to back across the grain. After cutting the panels, I'll joint one face and both edges. Joint the face first and then the edges. Do as I say, not as I do. I had to rejoint the edges before glue up to ensure square edge surface for gluing. Then I'll thickness plane the panels, which I did not get on the camera. The top thickness is not critical, so I just planed the panels down until they were smooth and equal thickness. I think these came out to about 7/8 of an inch. Next, I'll glue up the panels. Take your time and arrange the panels to give the most aesthetic presentation they will offer up. Try to match color variation and grain patterns. If you have any sapwood like I do here on these walnut panels, you'll probably want to try to keep those to the outside edge. I suppose most people would use cauls to bring the seams level, but I am using 4 F-clamps and a couple of deep throat C-clamps to do the same thing. Works just fine. I like to clean up as much of my glue squeeze out as I can now rather than have to scrape a bunch off later. Now I'll let this cure for a few hours, or in this case, overnight. After removing the clamps, I'll scrape off any squeeze out I didn't get before. At this point, if there are any surface imperfections like knots, I'll fill them with a mix of 5-minute epoxy and walnut sawdust. After it is cured for about 20 minutes, I'll sand down the excess epoxy. I don't want to run that through the drum sander and gum up the paper on the drums. Next step is to cut the size. I already have a good square edge since I jointed all the edges for the glue up, so the first cut is on the fence to rip the depth of 20 inches. Then I'll set up a sled to cross-cut the width to 22 inches. First I cut the one side to square it up, and then I flip it over to cut the length. Now I'm going to run them through the drum sander to clean up from the glue up and get a nice flat surface on them. Now I'm going to do a little bit of finish sanding with some 220 on the orbital. Next I'll run it through the router table to put a 1/4 fillet on the top edge. The bottom edge you'll get a hand sanded chamfer of 1/32 inch just to take the edge off. Sharp edges are prone to chipping. This is my prototype leg that I cut out of cedar. I'm going to use this as a model to make the walnut legs. First, I'll use it to mark my cutouts, and then later I'll use it to cut the legs out with a trimmer bit on the router table. I've got a nice piece of 8/4 figured walnut to use for the legs. It's already been jointed on one face. I'm going to thickness plane it now down to 1.5 inches. Using that prototype leg I made, I'm going to draw out my legs. I'm going to leave space in between each one so that I have material to work with when I use the trimmer bit. Now I'll do a rough cut out on the bandsaw, making sure I stay well outside my lines. I'm using a 2-sided tape to hold my prototype onto the target leg. I find that clamping it for a few minutes gives me a stronger bond. I'll use a 2-inch trimmer bit to trim the legs down from the prototype. This tape can be pretty tough. It can be pretty hard to get this off, so you want to find a balance between how much tape you use and how much you need to have a good bond so it doesn't come loose while you're trimming it. If you're really good with the trimmer bit, you may not need this next step, but I had some cleaning up to do, so I headed off to the belt sander to put a nice edge on them all. So what we are looking for on the shape is for the fillet to go all the way from the top to the bottom on the outside out corner or edge and the inside edge where there won't be any joint. This is the left front leg, so this is the outside edge and this is the inside edge, and they're filleted all the way. On the inside edges where the side will joint here to these tenons or mortises, and on the corner right here where the joint will be to the drawer guide on the front, we want that to be a square edge where the joint will be. So the fillet's only going to run from the bottom up to 6 inches from the top, and there we'll feather the fillet out to that square edge. So I need to be pretty careful here to get the correct edges squared or filleted. The legs are not identical, so it is easy to get mixed up. So here I'm marking the edges that I will run the fillet all the way up on, so I don't get confused when I'm running it through the router. So I'm using a 1/2 inch round over bit here. First I'm going to run the 2 full edges through, and then I'll start at the feathered end and push the leg into the bit to set my termination point, and then I'll run it from the bottom up to that point. Final shaping will be by hand with various grits of sandpaper. It took several hours to get just the right shape on each of these legs, with a smooth transition from the fillet to the squared edge. This is the ideal shape we're aiming for. Here I'm going to draw out the mortises and the dovetail. So for a better view and explanation of what I was doing in that last clip, drawing the mortises, this is the left front leg, and what I'm drawing are 2 mortises for the side panel to connect in from the back, and a mortise for the bottom drawer guide, and a dovetail for the upper drawer guide. And this is basically what they look like. On the top you'll draw the dovetail shape, mortise, and these mortises. Specifications for these are on the plans which follow this clip. Here I'm marking out the dovetail for the upper drawer guide. I'm going to hand cut this particular dovetail. I'm marking this line and this here lower one with the knife to give my chisel a groove to home to when I cut these. For the mortises, I'm using this mortising machine. It's the first time I've used one of these, and maybe the last. I'm not sure how much time it really saved me. I still had to do a fair amount of chisel work to clean these up. And once we're done with these, we're done with the legs for now. In the next part, we're going to move on to doing the rest of the frame. For the rest of the frame, we need to make 2 side panels, 1 back panel, 1 rear top screw panel, 1 front top drawer guide, 1 front bottom drawer guide, 1 right drawer guide, and 1 left drawer guide. The following video won't show each and every part of being cut. Refer to the plans for details on cut dimensions. First step is to cut all the parts to rough dimensions. Joint 1 face and at least 1 edge of each board. Here I'm resawing to make thinner parts for the drawers that we'll use in the next section. After jointing all the parts, I'll thickness plane them to 3/4 of an inch. And then next I'll rip cut all the widths on the table saw. Then I'll use the sled to cross cut all the lengths, always trimming off one end first to ensure a square edge, and then flipping and cutting the final length. Next I'll cut the tenons. I didn't get the full process of cutting the tenons on video, so I'm going to run through it here in a simulation to show you how I went about cutting them. So first I run this through against the fence in this orientation and cut this line and this line, this line, and this line all the way through. So then the part that you saw, I turn it in this orientation and use the sled to cut this line, this line, this line, and this line. Then, still on the sled, I'm going to lay it over like this, and cut this line, this line, this line, and this line. Lastly, I turn it in this orientation and cut this line, this line, this line, and this line up here. That will remove everything but this strip right here in the middle that I will chisel out by hand. Here I'm cleaning up the tenon. Now I'm cutting out the tenons and dovetails on the front, top, and bottom drawer guides. I didn't get a super clean cut with a scroll saw, so I'm cleaning these up with a chisel to get a good fit on the part that wraps around the leg. Now I'm going to do a dry fit and make sure everything goes together nicely. It was a fair amount of labor to clean up the mortises on these legs and to get a good fit. Before I start gluing, I put some carnauba wax around all the glue joints, being careful not to get it on the glue surface itself. This will help with removing squeeze out later. For the glue up, I'm using Titebond 2. There are a fair number of joints, so I have to work quickly since I can't clamp until everything is assembled. If I try to do this in sections, I risk that it will end up racked, so I want to clamp it up while it is sitting up square and level on the table. First, I assemble each side. Then I join the sides with the front bottom drawer guide. Then I add the front top drawer guide. And finally, add the back panel. Once that is all clamped up, I can glue in the bottom piece of the side drawer guide and attach the upper adjustable part of the guide. After all the clamps come off, I will glue on the rear screw plate. One thing I didn't capture on video is the attachment of the top and attachment of the upper part of the side guide rails, both of which are screwed in. To attach these, we need to have slotted screw holes in the front top guide rail, the rear top screw plate, and the upper part of the side guide rails. The slotted screws in the front top guide rail and the rear screw plate are to mount the top. If you don't over-tighten these screws, this will allow natural movement of the top and prevent it from splitting under pressure. The slotted screws in the side guide rail are to allow it to be adjusted to a close fit so that the drawer slides in and out without play. In part 4, we will make the drawers with, in my case, hand-cut dovetails. You can, of course, do the dovetails on your CNC if you have one. We need to make one drawer front, one back, two sides, and a bottom. And in my case, I made a handle that I think really ties the walnut and cherry together nicely. You can, of course, put any handle you like on the drawer. I had already cut out the rough cuts earlier, so now I'm just jointing the edge before I resaw the parts. I'm using 4/4 cherry, so to get 3/8 panels, I'll resaw the 4/4 in half and then thickness plane it down to 3/8 inch. Same for the bottom, except the bottom panels will be thickness planed down to 1/4 inch. Gluing 1/4 inch panels together can be challenging. On my channel I have a slowed down version of how I glue thin panels together using my go-bar clamping system. In short, the go-bar clamps keep the thin boards flat against the floor while the bar clamps clamp the panels together. Came out nice and flat. Once the floor panel comes off the go-bar, I'll run it through the drum sander to get a smooth surface. I know, right? The drum sander looks a little different. I'm going to sand this down till it's 1/4 inch thick. Now I'll hand cut the dovetails. Here also I have a pair of videos on my channel to show how I go about hand cutting dovetails. For the sake of time, I won't repeat that here. Now let's glue up the front, backs, and sides. And the last thing to do before finishing is install the floor. For finish, I'm using a mix of equal parts tung oil, boiled linseed oil, and high gloss varathane. It is basically a version of the Maloof finish. I've only recorded the sealer coat here, but I will continue to add coats until I'm satisfied with the finish. As the last coat, I will apply a mix of tung oil, boiled linseed oil, and a handful of melted beeswax. To apply, I wipe on a generous helping of the finish with a clean cotton rag. I'll let this soak in for a bit, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then I'll buff it out with a dry cotton rag. And that's it. If you've enjoyed this video, please hit the thumbs up below and consider subscribing to my channel. I would love to hear your comments and answer any questions you have. Below you'll find links to the plans, cut sheet, and Fusion 360 model. Happy trails, and we'll see you down the road.